Hey there and welcome back to another Illumination video. And today I want to talk a little bit about the studio in general and make the argument that it really isn't all that bad at all. In fact, I'd argue that it's a very decent animation studio. And maybe you think I'm making a pretty obvious statement, but I legitimately think it's something that needs to be said. Whenever people talk about the best animated studios around, they usually 100% say Pixar's on top. And then Disney, and then you might get the occasional non-American studio get a mention, but those are probably a little bit more niche. After that, maybe DreamWorks is there, although that's clearly held on a secondary tier to the first two. But in my eyes, Illumination gets left out in the cold every day of the week. You know, it's the typical sort of thing. People see the concept of Minions and instantly, not only are the films made by the studio branded as exclusively for kids, but also as very stupid, the kind of thing that only kids can enjoy, and that objectively, they're annoying and trash. And it's a pretty hot take, but it's one that seems quite prevalent from my point of view. Because not only do these films sort of get dragged through the mud somewhat unfairly in my eyes, but the rest of the studio's library does as well, and I really don't think that's fair. This is a DreamWorks level studio, but people are acting like it's the town pariah, that there's no redeeming film from its catalogue whatsoever, and everything they make sucks. And like I said, I really don't think that's fair to say. It might not be raking in the best animated feature nominations, but the studio consistently makes films that do well at the box office. I mean, yeah, they've had their share of failures, but every studio has, if you ask me. But when you look at it, on average, they make decent films, and their highs are pretty damn high. For starters, there's the Despicable Me franchise, and this includes the two Minions standalone spin-off films, so that's 5 films for the franchise so far, with a 6th on the way. Despicable Me, the first film, I don't care if your opinion's coloured by the fact that you hate the Minions, but I'm sorry. There is no denying that this first film is a veritable classic. And it has a decent score of 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, a fun twist that sees the villain become the hero, it's upbeat and exciting with a witty script, funny characters and a killer soundtrack. I mean, this is the film that launched the studio. This was their first franchise player. And in my eyes at least, it's become very influential to other studios who jumped on the bandwagon to make films with a similar feel. Films with characters that would play a similar role to that of the Minions, the dopey, silly, ridiculous sidekicks. It's not really a new stock character, but it's a fresh take on that character. The second film, well, it's not exactly Shrek 2 as far as sequels go, but it was still decent in my eyes, 75% Rotten Tomatoes score. And it ended up being a financial sensation, almost grossing $1 billion. The third film, well, I guess that's where the formula did start to get a little bit tired. This is its Shrek the Third moment, and it got a 59% critical score. But what do you know, it made over $1 billion at the box office, so I think it evens out a bit there. And then we come to the first Minions film, which is a classic case of too much of a good thing, because whilst Minions are fun, they really aren't characters that should be the primary focal point of any film. In simple terms, they need Gru to play off of in order to be funny. And that's why I think this film did relatively badly with its 55% score. It doesn't strike that much needed balance. And so whilst it broke the box office, it did suck. And this is why I think the second Minions film did so much better than the first. It understands that the Minions need Gru, and Gru needs the Minions. They're the perfect duo, and without one half of the pair, the franchise feels out of balance. But here, you get Gru and you get the Minions, and you get them both in adequate doses, so nothing gets overused or tired. And this one got the franchise back on track in terms of critical scores, and once again, made almost $1 billion at the box office. This thing just prints money. But of course, every studio does have its stinkers, and Illumination is no exception to this, obviously. Which brings us to Hop, a live-action film with animated elements, and it's honestly terrible. It's absolute dog shit. Seriously, they don't make them like this one anymore. They just don't. Or at least, they don't release them in cinemas anymore. How streaming services have changed the world. But yeah, this movie's trash. By far the lowest critical score in their library, and yet it somehow still managed to do okay at the box office. They also tried their hands at making adaptations of the classic Dr. Seuss stories The Lorax and The Grinch, but I think these films make it clear that the Illumination formula really works best on original characters as opposed to adaptations. I don't know why, but maybe people didn't appreciate Illumination's particular brand of silliness when it comes to characters they know and love, like the Lorax and the Grinch, characters from their childhood. They still did well financially, but the reviews were not good. For the Lorax, the idea was that they missed the point of the story entirely and instead gave in to a consumerist message, and the Grinch, well, didn't really set itself apart at all and felt very generic and dull. And so that leaves us with two decently big franchises that made their debut in the mid to late 2010s, Sing and The Secret Life of Pets. Sing, the first Sing film, I love it. Takes a concept that people know and love, and that had become hugely popular in the last 20 years or so, a singing talent show in front of a live audience where there's lots of cringe, and they infuse it with yet another thing that people love, movies about talking animals. And they cap that off with some fun slapstick and Illumination's patented brand of absurdist comedy. And the result is actually a decent film. A decent film with a decent score and a very good box office return. Followed by a film that was pretty much exactly the same, with the same score and a slightly reduced box office, but still, in the end, a good performance for the franchise as a whole. Which leaves us with The Secret Life of Pets, a franchise that plays on the classic trope of your pets having hyper-intelligence and living their own lives when their owners are away at work or school or whatever. And yeah, it's pretty much the same as Sing. A decent franchise that does well at the box office, but is not on the same level as that flagship franchise, but still enough to be considered quite lucrative. The first one was better both critically and commercially than the sequel, but it's not like the sequel is overly terrible either. So, we have a bunch of average films, one or two great films, and then a couple of polished turds. And yet, despite this relatively good record, the studio can't seem to shake this sense of inferiority that hangs over it. The feel of being a second-rate studio. And that's a shame, because I honestly think it's far from the truth. The studio makes good films for kids. And in recent years, there's been a big push for animation to be accepted as something that everybody can enjoy. And fair enough, yeah, there's no shame there, I love me some animation. But at the same time, alongside this, I feel like there's also been a bit of a backlash. This pushback against things that are perceived to be more heavily favouring that demographic, younger audiences. And you see it with live action films too, that since they target younger audiences, that means they're inherently lesser, not as good, not as worthy, less prestigious, and I honestly don't think that's fair. After all, are we just saying that these movies should never be made at all, despite the fact that kids love them, and they make up a core part of their childhood? Is everything expected to target all demographics at once? Do you have to be part of a target demographic to find value in a film in the first place? I don't think so, and it's honestly a shame. Because if you go into these ahead of time, knowing that these are a more child-oriented product, and then you try to put yourself in that mindset yourself, I feel like these films have become infinitely more relatable, exciting, nostalgic, and fun. You can enjoy them like you were a kid again. That's the point. And so yeah, Illumination needs more love. They make films that kids enjoy, that make them happy, and they make no apologies for that. And so I think it's a shame that they're almost sneered at as silly or childish or stupid. Because for the most part, they've had far more success than failures across their 12-year history. And that's a better track record than most. But of course, with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about Illumination Studios? Are they overlooked, or do you just think they suck as well? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.